It's Ash from Super Videos, back for another video for Season 9 of The Walking Dead. This is going to be my episode review for Season 9, Episode 16, the finale of Season 9 of The Walking Dead, called The Storm. Now, one thing I do want to mention right off the bat is that if we are comparing this episode to the lead up to this episode, which was Season 9, Episode 15, then I would honestly say, and I don't think there's anyone else that would disagree with me, but I will honestly say that this was a disappointing episode when we are comparing it to episode 15. Now, myself, I enjoyed this episode, but I went into this episode not expecting anything big, not expecting it to blow me away because of what episode 15 already delivered. Now, as an episode, as a standalone episode, this episode was a strong episode. It was a solid episode, but it was definitely slower paced. But I would say it was maybe just as good or maybe a little less than the other episodes that we've seen during the second half of the season. With that said, as a finale, this episode was still underwhelming. So putting aside the fact that episode 15 was just massive, as a finale, episode 16 just did not deliver. In terms of the pace, in terms of the story, there wasn't a lot there that really matched a finale episode. And I don't mean someone having to be dead for this episode to be a big episode, but I just felt like the energy of this episode or the story of the episode just was not there. With that said, like I said, it was a solid episode. It just did not deliver as a finale episode. The only real story that I saw in this episode was the Negan storyline, which was the beginning of his redemption arc, which I loved, and the other was the Carol Lydia story, which I absolutely loved as well. Other than these two, I can't really say there was anything there in the story that made this episode a great and iconic episode as its own, or as a solid enough finale to leave a mark. And really, what I see this episode as is a build-up to the next season, which is, in a way, what a finale is supposed to do, but at the same time, it just felt there was something missing. Now, I did mention the two stories that I did enjoy. Obviously, the cliffhanger was something that we were expecting, we were anticipating, so I loved that as well. However, I was disappointed because just like many fans, not necessarily that we were under the impression that we were going to get a Rick reveal or a mention of Rick, but the build-up was just so high and everything was kind of pointing to that, and because we didn't get that, it felt a little disappointing. But that said, that's just on fans, and it's a fan theory that just didn't go through. But I just thought that, you know, what they gave us as a cliffhanger was good, but it felt like it was just over real quick. They needed to drag it a little bit. It just ended a little too quickly. But I do want to go through some of the main plot points and just share my quick opinions on them. The kingdom falling and their journey from kingdom to hilltop, I absolutely enjoyed that. And I think the snow and the storm played a big part in that. And I think if there was no snow, that storyline with them going from kingdom to hilltop would have been very dry, and it would have just been a disappointing, story. Remember, the majority of this episode, the story of this episode was the journey from kingdom to hilltop. Now, the next thing I do want to cover is Lydia trying to kill herself and the Carol and Lydia dynamic that they built and everything there. I absolutely loved that, and I think that the story between Carol and Lydia was a great conclusive moment that not only builds up the next season and the stories that we're going to see next season between Carol and potentially Lydia and Alpha and everyone, but also it's just a great way to wrap up or conclude Carol's grieving and to kind of push her towards a new direction next season. Next, the frozen walkers and the storm that I do want to mention real quick. I absolutely loved the walkers that we saw, and I think, like I said, the storm and the snow definitely breathed new air into the show and made the show unique and interesting on its own. And I think one of the key things that I absolutely loved about in this episode was the storm. Unfortunately, we're probably not going to see snow anymore next season or ever on The Walking Dead again, but I absolutely loved that they at least brought it for one episode. Now, going into the part with Daryl almost getting bit, I don't think there was enough tension there. We all knew he wasn't gonna die. It was just unnecessary. And I think that they could have spent the time they spent on Daryl trying to kill the Walker and the tension they built up for something else that's maybe much more interesting and maybe more shocking. The Daryl Ezekiel conversation I felt was deep. I really liked that. However, I felt a little bit of Ezekiel not acting like himself. It was like they took character and made him say things or do things that doesn't necessarily match with who he is, what they have been setting up for that character. Now, I do understand what they're trying to do with Ezekiel and the Daryl situation, but I just felt that could have been changed a little bit to make it more realistic and for that character to be more true to his own personality and to who he is. Them going to the sanctuary, I absolutely loved. I didn't see that coming. That was a good twist in the story. It didn't really do much, but I liked that they brought it back up at the end when we have the conversation between Negan and Michonne. Moving into Alexandria, them letting Negan out, I absolutely loved that storyline. Negan poking fun at Gabriel, loved that. That was pretty entertaining to see. When we have Negan saving Judith and Dog, I felt like that was a great redemption arc and something that I feel goes a long way in pushing Negan's character into a new direction, a more interesting direction. So I absolutely love that. I think this episode, the Negan redemption arc that they set up or they build up in this episode was my favorite part of this episode. Then we have them getting to the hilltop and then we get the, I guess, big reveal that Carol and Ezekiel are broken up. Now, I don't really like that story. Again, just like I mentioned before, it feels like, at least for Ezekiel, from Ezekiel's end, he's not really acting right. He's not necessarily staying true to who he really is. For Carol, it's a bit more understandable. But for King Ezekiel, I just think there's something missing that would make that more realistic in a way. The Negan-Michonne conversation I mentioned, I absolutely loved it. And I absolutely loved that they brought back some of the previous points that they made, not only in this episode, but throughout the season. I loved what Negan said, that specific Negan dialogue when he said, not everyone knows that they're being the evil person. I absolutely loved that. And we're beginning to see seeds being planted for Negan potentially stepping up and giving advice and trying to help out the group when it comes to the Whispers, which I absolutely love to see next season, if they stay true to the comic material. Then we get to the Whispers part. I didn't even think we would get Whispers in this episode. It would have been extremely odd not to, and I think even though they were shown in this episode, it was short. I think that they could have spent a bit more time with them. So that was a wasted opportunity in my opinion. But Alpha getting whipped or punished by Beta, that's an interesting dynamic. That's an interesting kind of story that I would love them to dive deeper into in next season. Then we get to the part with the voice on the radio with the cliffhanger. Like I said, I liked it. I was expecting it, but I felt disappointed because it wasn't Rick. Obviously, I think it was a big expectation for us as fans to want Rick in the finale on the radio, and that would have been fan service in a way, but I like what they did. It's just that I was disappointed it wasn't Rick. Now, for those of you that missed it, what was actually said on the radio was hello, calling out live on the open air, is anybody out there? And that's basically what was said. Now, it wasn't loud. I could hardly understand what was said, and I actually went and checked online to find out what was exactly said. So that took away from it a little bit because we didn't really understand what was said. So it was like, that's cool and everything, but what did she actually say? And it was a female that said that. It wasn't a male character. Now, who could it possibly be? I'm doing a separate video on that. It should be up right after this video. You can go there and check it out. There's definitely some characters that are potential candidates to be the one on the radio, but I'll dive deeper into that on a separate video. But like I said, for a finale, a disappointing finale. For a standalone episode by itself, it was a solid episode. For an episode that followed episode 15, it was also underwhelming. But overall, I would say this was a good episode. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video. If you like what you see, press like, subscribe for more content, and press the bell button to receive notifications for daily uploads.